Metallica, the heavy metal undisputed kings. They have dominated the rock and metal scene for over 4 decades, conquering the stadiums, topping the world's largest festivals, and selling over 163 million albums worldwide. They didn't merely perform thrash, they defined it, making a furious underground genre a cultural phenomenon. From the early days of tearing down Hit the Lights in dingy clubs to the symphonic majesty of their S&M sessions, Metallica have consistently demonstrated that they are a band, not just a band, they're an institution. But even giants have limits. Despite all their success and domination, Metallica have not always shared the bill with every other rock titan that came along. In reality, behind the tours, the fireworks, and the legendary shows, there are as many stories of refusals, rivalries, and total mismatches. Today, we're deconstructing the top 10 bands Metallica wouldn't tour with, and why. From punk legends to glam giants, from nu metal titans to bitter enemies, some of these tales will leave you gobsmacked, some will tickle your funny bone, and a few will cause you to ponder what could have been had egos, images, and fans magically aligned. So strap in, because this list is crazy. Number 10, Slipknot. Few contemporary bands capture the essence of chaos, theatrical ferocity, and raw, unfiltered energy as Slipknot. Since their self-titled album Ignited in 1999, Slipknot dominated the stage with a state of madness that borders on supernatural. 9 masked performers crash around the stage, beating on extra drums, scaling scaffolding, and releasing nuclear-strength anthems such as Wait and Bleed and Duality. Theirs is a spectacle of mayhem aimed at bludgeoning every sense. On paper, you'd imagine coupling Slipknot with Metallica, the largest metal band in the world, would be a foregone conclusion. But here's the thing, it never transpired. And the reasons are down to intensity, control, and pride. Metallica's live performances, while still brutal, are the antithesis of Slipknot's chaos. Where Slipknot revels in chaos, generating a whirlwind of sound and movement that teeters on the edge of meltdown, Metallica takes pride in refinement, form, and lean musicianship. A Metallica show is a highly polished machine, ferocious indeed, but measured and efficient. Combining it with Slipknot's anarchic unpredictability would have been oil and water, intriguing in concept, incendiary in actuality. And then there's the crowd dynamic. Slipknot's audience is young and feral and wants extremity. Walls of death, mosh pits, and pure carnage are on the agenda. Metallica's crowd cuts across ages. There are still old-school thrashers in the pit, and there are parents who bring their teenagers, and even families exposing their children to the band that transformed their own younger years. Putting those two groups of people into one stadium, the volatility potential was just too high. And lastly, there's the issue of pride. Both Metallica and Slipknot are headliner-quality acts. Neither would ever want to be listed below the other. Who would close the evening? Who would receive the more extensive set? Who would receive the louder applause? For Metallica, who in large part protect their number one position jealously, to share a spotlight with Slipknot just wasn't worth it. It's not because there's hostility. Slipknot frontman Corey Taylor has heaped accolades on Metallica numerous times, describing them as one of his greatest influences. But as Taylor conceded in 2019, the two groups are worlds apart in their stage methods. The Slipknot Metallica tour fantasy is one of heavy metal's great what-ifs, but one that Metallica sensibly left on a sketchpad. Number 9, Creed. Now, criticize them as you wish, but Creed were huge when they were at the height of their popularity. Their 1999 album Human Clay went on to sell more than 20 million copies worldwide, and radio staples such as Higher and With Arms Wide Open filled every station. By the early 2000s, Creed were topping arenas and festival lineups, establishing themselves as one of America's biggest bands. But Metallica never toured with them, and the reasons are obvious: musical philosophy, image, and fan culture. Creed's music relied heavily on balladry, spiritual themes, and dramatic baritone vocals by Scott Stapp. Theirs was the kind of lyrics that were commonly read as Christian-influenced anthems of optimism, despite the band never officially being promoted as religious. Metallica, conversely, forged their legacy on tackling darkness, fury, and inner turmoil. The two philosophies couldn't be more disparate, one urging listeners to reach higher, the other pulling listeners into darkness. Them being released together would have been tonal whiplash. Then there's Image. By the late 1990s, Metallica were already coming under fire for shaving their heads, altering their logo, and putting out the Unacceptable Load and Reload albums, which crossed over into alternative rock. Critics were saying they'd gone soft. Collaborating with Creed, a band much derided as too commercial, would have all but guaranteed that narrative. Lars Ulrich himself had previously disapproved of bands that bucked credibility for radio palatability, and Creed, in the opinion of many, was the very embodiment of that concept. Fans wouldn't have let Metallica off the hook for it. Imagine half the crowd swaying to With Arms Wide Open, then slammed by Battery a few minutes later, Oil and Water again. Subtly, Metallica evaded the confrontation, opting to tour with bands such as Pantera or Corrosion of Conformity, bands that enhanced their heavy credentials. It wasn't a rivalry, simply a deliberate decision to safeguard their reputation. Number 8, The Offspring. In the mid-1990s, The Offspring were riding a wave of punk revival with their hit album Smash, including hits like Come Out and Play and Self-Esteem. Their tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic attitude found a home in millions of ears, and they were one of the most successful punk bands of the decade. Somewhere around the same time, Metallica had just burst into mainstream superstardom with the Black Album, selling out stadiums all over the world. On paper, a co-headline tour could have been huge, but Metallica said no. Why? Because The Offspring's goofy sarcasm did not fit with Metallica's increasingly somber, darker vibe. Dexter Holland's goofy come-ons and skate-punk sing-alongs would have conflicted with James Hetfield's intense delivery of tracks such as Sad But True. And whereas The Offspring were ruling theaters and arenas, Metallica already had shot past stadiums. The logistics alone made the duo an awkward fit. To their credit, The Offspring honored the ruling. Dexter Holland subsequently explained that he realized they were different worlds. No ill will, merely a lost chance at a captivating crossover tour. Number 7, Limp Bizkit. Love them or despise them. Limp Bizkit were impossible to escape in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Fred Durst, complete with Red Yankees cap and arrogant swagger, was the face of nu metal alongside Korn and Slipknot. Anthem's Break Stuff and Rollin' made them MTV staples, and their concerts brought chaos. So, why didn't Metallica align themselves with them during the nu metal explosion? 3 words: image, fans, and reliability. Metallica's brand rested on grit, seriousness, and musicianship. Limp Bizkit's rested on spectacle, attitude, and frat boy aggression. James Hetfield once poo-pooed nu metal bands as pursuing shock value over artistry, not so subtly disparaging Durst and crew. Their fan bases didn't either. Metallica fans clamored for thrash and sweat. Limp Bizkit fans clamored for rap rock, catharsis, and anarchy. And then there was Woodstock 99, whose Limp Bizkit set notoriously devolved into riots. Metallica, having just wrapped their ambitious S&M symphony opus, could not afford to be seen with a band that had become synonymous with wantonness. A Metallica Limp Bizkit tour would have been huge, but a disaster for Metallica's reputation. Number 6, Nickelback. Few bands have been so successful and so lampooned as Nickelback. In the early 2000s, their album Silver Side Up and single How You Remind Me oversaturated every radio and jukebox. They were corporate monsters, but Metallica had no interest in being anywhere near them. Why? Image. Nickelback's label as corporate rock was antithetical to Metallica's image as the people's band. Metallica, particularly during the St. Anger controversy era, simply couldn't risk being called sellouts. Collaborating with Nickelback would have been tantamount to giving critics their best joke. Metallica goes soft. Aside from that, their tours just didn't mesh. Metallica is fueled by mosh pits, violence, and cleansing. Nickelback tours are founded on sing-alongs at the radio and arena anthems. It would have driven fans crazy. And let's face it, Nickelback's position as the object of constant ridicule didn't sit well. Metallica weren't going to jeopardize their legacy for laughs. Number 5, Korn. Korn effectively created nu metal with their down-tuned guitars, tormented lyrics, and Jonathan Davis's wailing singing style. By the late 1990s, they were spearheading a cultural phenomenon, selling millions of albums and topping the festivals. But Metallica never co-toured with them. Why? Because their sounds, images, and fan bases did not overlap. Korn's dark, brooding, groove-oriented sound was therapeutic but self-consciously disturbing. Metallica's thrash accuracy didn't fit the mood. More to the point, Korn represented the nu metal genre, a scene most purist metalheads saw as a fad. Metallica, still recovering from the credibility loss of Load and Reload, couldn't risk being lumped in with a scene critics foresaw as temporary. Festivals, such as Woodstock '99, paired them together on a bill, but a co-headlining tour? That was never going to happen. Number 4, Kiss. Kiss and Metallica are both titans, but for opposite reasons. Kiss constructed their empire around face paint, costumes, pyrotechnics, and excessive stagecraft. Metallica constructed theirs around rejecting all that. During the 1980s, while glam metal groups like Poison and Motley Crue dominated MTV, Metallica doubled down on honesty, jeans, t-shirts, and naked hostility. Lars Ulrich once ridiculed glam metal as phony and superficial. Although he didn't specify Kiss, the inference was unmistakable. Both groups were still huge by the 1990s, but a combined tour would have been weird. Kiss concerts involved fire-breathing and blood-spitting. Metallica concerts involved raw strength and thrash intensity. Their audiences didn't overlap. Either Metallica audiences loathed glam, and Kiss audiences were all about camp. Factor in the logistical disaster of mixing Kiss's over-the-top stage productions with Metallica's more minimalist setups, and it was a non-starter. Number 3, Megadeth. If Metallica ever should have toured with a band, it was Megadeth. They share thrash origins, after all, and Dave Mustaine was Metallica's first lead guitarist. But when Mustaine was famously let go in 1983 over substance abuse and issues with Hetfield and Ulrich, he set out for revenge, starting Megadeth and igniting one of metal's most legendary feuds. Mustaine skewered Metallica for years, and while the two bands sometimes co-billed at festivals, such as the Big Four performances in 2010 and 2011, a full-scale co-tour never materialized. Why not? Because the wounds never closed. As recently as 2020, Mustaine confessed that he still maintained grudges, and Metallica, with their reputation to uphold, weren't going to give their competitors an arena-sized soapbox. Fans fantasized about hearing Master of Puppets and Holy Wars played consecutively, but the load was too heavy to carry. Number 2, Linkin Park. At the turn of the millennium, Linkin Park exploded with Hybrid Theory and Meteora, becoming one of the biggest bands on the planet. Their blend of metal riffs, rap vocals, and electronic textures resonated with a new generation. On paper, a Linkin Park Metallica tour would have been enormous. But it never happened. The main reason was genre. Linkin Park's hybrid style had tipped towards rap and electronica, and Metallica, after Saint Anger, were dead set on regaining their thrash street cred. Performing with Linkin Park would have tagged them with nu metal, which they did not wish to become aligned with. Timing was also not good. By the early 2000s, both acts were already headlining arenas and festivals. Neither would open for the other. Their listeners as well were quite different. Metallica fans craved aggression and mosh pits. Linkin Park fans craved sing-alongs and catharsis. There was respect between the bands, but a tour would have disappointed both fan bases. Number 1, Guns N' Roses. Technically, Metallica did go on tour with Guns N' Roses in 1992, and it was a disaster. On paper, the plans sounded great, two of the largest bands in the world on one stage. Metallica were riding high from the Black Album, while Guns N' Roses remained huge with Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. But from the very beginning, chaos reigned. The most notorious night was in Montreal. During Metallica's performance, James Hetfield stepped into a botched pyro and was severely burned, causing the band to shorten their set. Fans were apologetic but tolerant, until Guns N' Roses performed late, delivered a brief set, and departed due to Axl Rose's reporting of vocal issues. The crowd went out of control and destroyed everything in sight. It wasn't an isolated incident either. Throughout the tour, Axl's tardiness and unpredictability caused constant friction. Lars Ulrich later called the tour frustrating and made it clear Metallica would never put themselves through that circus again.